In this episode, I talk about tacky holiday sweaters. I compare the Visconti Opera Master and the Pilot Custom 823, and I talk about which pen I would use if I could only use one pen for a full year. Hey everybody, Brian Goulet here of GouletPens.com, and it is number 148 of Goulet Q&A, my weekly episode here, and I got a lot of good pens to talk about on this one. It's been a fun day for me today. Literally, like, as I was sitting down to shoot this Q&A, Madigan messages me and says, we can do Instagram live stories now. We just got the ability on our account. This is on Wednesday, of course, when I'm actually filming this. By the time you see this on Friday or maybe later, Instagram live stories is like old news. It's like 3 days old. But anyway, so we have the ability to do that now. Jumped on. It's pretty fun. It's literally like Periscope on Instagram, just like riding a bike. And so it was a lot of fun. I'm sure we'll incorporate some fun stuff into that, you know, you gotta kind of keep on these different things, but we got a nice Instagram following. I think that's going to mate very nicely with the functionality, and it's going to be fun. So we'll play around with that a little bit. We did have a tacky sweater day earlier in the week for us here at Goulet, and it's been kind of funny just because you know, particularly Drew, our customer care manager, he and I go way back, but he has a pretty good collection of you know, holiday sweaters, and so he's been wearing a different sweater every day during the week. He's got to recycle them, obviously, but he's been wearing a different sweater every day during the week ever since Thanksgiving started, and he's going to keep that up through Christmas. So pretty entertaining there. But we had the whole company wear, anybody who had one to wear on Tuesday. We took a picture. It was a lot of fun. So always good stuff there, and to be motivational. I always like to say like some sort of motivational, inspirational kind of leadership quote or something like that to you know, inspire my leadership team when we meet in the morning. And because of the whole sweater thing this week, I've been replacing some of the key words in the quotes that I've been using with the word sweater. And so I just think that's been kind of fun. Like this one from John Maxwell: the true measure of leadership is sweaters, nothing more, nothing less. And just like silly stuff like that. And then some good conversation came out of that from the rest of the team about, what do you do when it's not Christmas time? Well, you can replace it with the word bacon. Works equally as well. Like, for example, famous quote from Wayne Gretzky: you miss 100% of the bacon you never take. Of course, you miss 100% of the shots you never take. Famous hockey player there, but you know, it's fun. Trying to keep it fresh here at the GPC. Also, you'll see that I'm wearing this sweet shirt. I have kind of accidentally become a bit of a Trans-Siberian Orchestra groupie. It started out last year. It was on my bucket list to see them last year. Rachel and I got absolute, like, the nosebleed seats that you could get. Literally, we were in the Richmond Coliseum down here in Richmond, Virginia, which is this huge stadium coliseum thing, and our backs were against the wall at the highest position. We were like 30 feet above the lighting fixtures on the stage, all the way on the side. Terrible seats, but it was still like the most amazing concert I've ever been to. So this year we wanted to see the actual show, so we got 4 seats, really good seats, and it was completely epic. And so I got this sweet shirt, this amazing shirt with a wizard and a moon galaxy thing going on, some kind of like falcon or something, this like bullet train, a Siberian tiger, and like this ghost ship. It's like completely epic. Anyway, so back to like real world stuff here. We've had some shipping deadlines that have been coming up here. It's, you know, Christmas time, and you know, Christmas is a big day for a lot of people to give gifts. People are in the pens, give lots of gifts, and so it's a very busy time of year for us. You know, it doesn't have to be just Christmas. It could be Hanukkah. It could be a lot of different things. So, but that deadline is kind of a big one for us. So we try to publish out like, hey, guys, if you want stuff in time, here's the dates you got to ship it, with all the different various shipping methods based on what we've been told from the shippers, FedEx and USPS. When we can, you know, we can kind of guarantee to a degree the delivery, or not guarantee, but like, hey, this is your best bet at getting it. So anyway, we're coming up on some of those deadlines now. We have a whole blog post about it that I've got linked that you can check it out. If you go to the link in the description here on the blog, you can click to another link on the blog and you can see, but we also have it on our website when you go to check out. It has the dates there too. So, and because of, Christmas is impending and we're off for the Friday before and the Monday after Christmas here at Goulet. So because we're off Friday next week, I will not be publishing a Q&A because we won't have a team here to really do the publishing. And we're going to have a lot of people out of the office and stuff. So we're going to take that week off. We will publish the following week though. So the 30th will be the last Q&A of the year before we kick back up for 2017. So skipping a little bit of a beat, but not too much of a beat. And then with some products that we have here, I'll talk about these a little bit. So we have the Nemesign re-entry nibs, which is really a new thing. We haven't really talked about it because it's a kind of a concept thing that just came about. So Nemesign reached out to me about this concept of a re-entry, and we worked back and forth with them a little bit, and we're kind of one of the first to have it, but it's kind of cool. It's a re-entry nib, so they're taking their normal stainless steel nib and they're applying a firing technique, sort of like the Kaweco Lilliput Fire Blue. It's similar technique to that, so they basically, without getting too proprietary in there, they through various chemicals and an actual firing process, and then they seal it over top. And from the testing they've done, it says it holds up and shouldn't be affected by ink and stuff like that. Long term, perhaps, maybe there could be some wear and stuff like that would come about, but they've really taken a lot of steps to make this finish last as long as possible. It's a little bit of a premium. The normal nibs are, $10. These are $15 because of the labor that's involved, and it's a lot of hand labor. So they're torched in here so that when you actually install it in a pen, here's a Nemesign. This pen is called the Fission. This is what it ends up looking like. So it's kind of the silver at the base, and it ends up kind of like flamed at the top there. Really kind of cool. So it's a neat look, really kind of fun. It's a number 6 size nib, so it'll work in not only your Nemesign, but a lot of other pens. And it's not exclusive, like 2 Nemesign pens or something. It'll fit in some other ones, and it's not going to be offered on any of the pens at this point. It's only separate nibs. So you should check those out. It's pretty cool. Along the lines of Nemesign here, they are coming out with a new color called Azalea. So it's a nice pink color, a variation from the magenta color, which is really more of a purple. So kind of cool. We got these now, so you can check those out and all the nib sizes that we have. We're still at a 0.8 nibs for Nemesign right now. Very behind on those, but that's okay. Field Notes has their new seasonal notebook called Black Ice. I mentioned this before, but I actually physically have it to show you. So it's got this foil cover, which is very psychedelic, and I really dig the foil thing, so I'll show a little bit close up. And then it's got an embossed, raised finish here for the Field Notes. And then it has, for the first time, a glued binding instead of stapled. And then it's got a cover that kind of bends back like that. So it doesn't really lay flat super great like the stapled ones typically do, but that's okay. We'll forgive them for that. The rest of the notebook's still pretty cool. And then it's lined here. Of course, the exposure you can't really see. There's the lines. Its line goes all the way to the edge, and it's got a nice double line orange at the top. So I immediately thought of Brad Dowdy when I saw these. I was like, he's going to want these so bad because orange is his thing, just like blue is my thing. But very cool. So I always end up snagging a Field Notes set whenever they come in. I literally have like a whole bin of Field Notes notebooks over there. You can ask me about that in a future Q&A question. That would make for a good little showing there. But I don't have time to do it now because I have a bunch of other stuff to get through. And then the other thing that we have that's new is a new Visconti pen. So this is called the Pininfarina Zinno. So it's a variation of the Pininfarina Iridium, which is a super sweet looking pen. That's a retractable nib that is quite pricey as well. This one is a lot cheaper. MSRP on this one is just under $400. Now, it's still kind of a premium for Visconti because it has the tubular steel nib, which, that nib is used in pens kind of in this price range, sometimes a little more like the Opera Metal, sometimes a little less like the Millennium Arc that was out before. But if you like the overall aesthetic design and the Pininfarina brand, so, for those of you that don't know, Pininfarina is a designer that works with a lot of brands, especially Italian brands like Ferrari and things like that, and they've designed this pen and branded it. And it's magnetic cap. It's got the tubular Smart Touch nib, which is kind of cool. It's chromium nib, which is similar properties to stainless steel. Cartridge converter pen. It's got some neat things going on with it, so if you especially like this kind of retro kind of look to it, you know, spring clip and all that, it's got some neat features to it. So this is new. We literally just launched this week, so you can check that one out. And then I've got a whole slew of other things to talk about as I get into the questions. So let's kick it off. Starting out with pen and writing questions. This is from Lennox F on Facebook. Hi Brian, I'm currently looking to purchase a premium pen, and I was wondering, in your subjective opinion, how big the difference between a $1,000 pen like a Visconti Opera Master and a $300 pen like the Pilot Custom 823 in terms of just the nib smoothness and quality. Thank you very much. Love your videos and happy holidays. Thank you. Happy holidays to you too. All right, so we're talking about two different pens. Now, I love both of these pens, honestly. These are really good pens. And what's interesting is when you get into pens that are in this price range, really pens that are over kind of a $250, $300 kind of price range, the nibs themselves don't necessarily really add any value in terms of a writing experience. You get a great writing nib on pens, sometimes even less than that, but you know, the writing experience you're going to get on a pen like the Custom 823, it might be slightly different with a different brand or whatever, but the quality is still going to be very, very high if you spend $1,000 or $10,000 or $80,000. I don't have any $80,000 pens, but you know, the nibs that they use on them are the same. There's other qualities to the pen that make it to be that price. So there's a thing called the law of diminishing returns, if you're familiar with that economic concept. Basically, you start to pay, when you start at the very, very cheapest, you pay a little bit more and you get a huge jump in quality, but as you go up in price, the curve becomes steeper and you have to pay a disproportionately higher price to get just a little bit more benefit. And even then, when you get into the $1,000 type pens, the benefits that you're getting may not even appeal to you. So it actually may detract in value for you. So that you got to hit on the right thing it is you're looking for anyway. But if you're looking for the specific qualities of this pen, you're going to pay for it because it gets really expensive to do different things like design elements for the pen, theming that goes along with it, rare materials, things like rose gold plating is harder to do and more expensive than other types of things. You know, and so you get into all these different aspects of it and, you know, the limited nature of it. If they do a small batch and it's all by hand and all this kind of stuff, the price can go up significantly versus something that's more productionized and they sell a lot more of them. You know, the Custom 823 is more of a production run, so it's, you know, more of an injection molded kind of situation. So it's not quite as much of that handmade kind of quality that you're getting. If that matters to you, it may not. But the nib writing experience itself is going to be fairly similar. Now, specifically with these two pens, personally, I find the Opera Master to be a very heavy pen. I don't think it's as much of a daily carry pen for most people as the Custom 823 would be. The Custom 823 may even be a little heavier pen than most people would want to carry anyway, but the Opera Master is about twice the weight of this pen, so it's a significant jump there. Size-wise, it's going to be a little more manageable as well. You know, it's still a very long pen when it's posted, but the Opera Master, when you post it, is like a monster, you know, and it's very heavily back-weighted as well. I mean, the thing is massive. Even in my fairly large hands, it's a much more manageable pen in the Custom 823, especially with the top weighted and stuff like that. Now, the nice thing about this is the nib is incredibly wet, and I love the way this pen writes. But it's not always the ideal situation if you're trying to carry it around and write on newsprint or checks or anything like that, and you can't control the paper quality. Having a pen that's as wet as this, I've got the Opera Master. This is the Opera Master. I've got it with a medium, palladium nib on the Visconti. Man, it really, really gushes. Whereas Pilot is known, they're a Japanese brand, their nibs are finer and a little bit drier than the Visconti ones. So it's really going to boil down to what is your preference. Are you looking for kind of more of a conventional, kind of traditional carry-around pen? The cool thing about both of these is it's got the vacuum filling ink capacity, high ink capacity on both. They're both translucent so you can see what's going on. Very kind of cool aesthetics going on. You don't get as many color options with the Custom 823 because it's pretty much what you get. There are other colors in Japan, but in the US, it's this amber color and that's all you get with the gold trim. The disadvantage of the Opera Master, you can get some cool colors, but they're not a regularly available thing. They'll come out with a batch of them. You know, this particular pen, the Crimson Tide with the rose gold trim, there were 20 pens. and that was it. You know, so when you're dealing in very small batches like that, the price is usually going to be disproportionately higher than something that's a regular production run like this. And they're not going to be around for very long. So if you completely fall in love with this pen, you're going to have to find one from the 19 people that would be willing to sell you one, because I'm not going to sell you mine. So, you know, it's going to be tough to track down. So there's some pros and cons to both, but in terms of the actual writing experience, I think you're going to have a great writing experience with both of them. If you really want a wet, very springy kind of nib, gushing kind of experience, the Opera Master is going to be a little bit better for you. But if you want a little more of a versatile kind of carry-around pen that's going to be better on, you know, more absorbent papers, the A23 is going to be the way to go. All right, next question. This is from luke.mmm on Instagram. I'm not looking for a super big pen investment yet. I added the word super. But I am willing to spend up to $60 on one. I don't like the plasticky look on pens like the Lamy Safari. Are there any suggestions you have for a low-budget beginner's pen that don't look very cheap and maybe aren't plastic? So I loved this question because it's coming right after talking about a $300 to $1,000 pen, and it's like, how about a pen where there's a $60 cap? Great, I'm happy to go there. I love going there. Inexpensive pens are like my home base because that's kind of how I got into pens, and so I'm always, I mean, I love pens like this, but they're not attainable for everybody, so I love talking about the less expensive stuff because it's definitely more attainable for everybody. So getting on some of the more attainable ones, and I'm not naming you a single, well, okay, I have one resin pen in here, but the rest of them are all metal, so I'm happy to show them to you. So under $60, here we go. I think Jinhao is a great place to start, $10 to $12. Very solid pens for the money. Pretty decent writing experience. You could even swap out the nib with a Goulet nib if you wanted to expand your nib size options, get maybe a little smoother writing experience. You can totally do that with these pens. The X450 here, the X750, and then the 159, which is a monster, but you know, it is what it is. You can check any of these pens out. I think they are worthy and have some okay color options going on. I think a pen like the Lamy All-Star, you know, Lamy Safari is that plastic kind of look that you're going for. If you don't mind the aesthetics of the Safari, you just don't want it to be plastic, the All-Star is really cool. This right here is a Toffee All-Star, which is not available anymore, and I'm just a jerk for showing you a color that you can't get anymore. But it's got a plastic grip on it, which maybe that feels plastic to you, and that's turn off, but just in case, you know, the aesthetic, it's, you know, this nice kind of matte aluminum, anodized aluminum kind of finish to it, which I think is, I don't know if technically it's anodized or whatever the process is, but it's got that look to it. So you can check that out. Lots of good color options there. Does not look like plastic, except for that grip, of course, which is plastic. Another Lamy option for you is the logo. A couple different colors. It used to only be in a brushed steel, but now they have a twilight, which is kind of cool. So I think that one's worth checking out. The Faber-Castell Loom. I think this is a great pen for the money. It's a little bit more. It's more like in the $40 range. Some decent nib options though, especially the extra fine nib on this pen is one of the smoothest writing and finest extra fine European nibs that I've come across in my experience. Very nice build on this pen though. Faber-Castell has really high build quality with their pens, so you can check that one out. Now the one plastic one that I do have on here is the Conklin Durograph. So this one I kind of threw in there just to get it on your radar. It's a great pen for the money, more in that $45 range. And yes, it is plastic, but it's a nicer version of it. It's not an injection molded, cheap feeling kind of plastic. This plastic, for lack of a better term, typically is referred to as resin, but it's a cast acrylic resin as opposed to an injection molded plastic. It's a different type of plastic, and the manufacturing process is different because it's cast into a rod and then it's actually drilled out, turned, polished, and all that, as opposed to just spit out into a machine. So it's still plastic, but it's a higher quality looking piece with some very cool patterns and stuff like that. That maybe is just something you haven't had on your radar before, so I just wanted to kind of point that out. But those are some good options for you, all in your price range that I think would be good. Halfaps on Instagram, forgive me if I botched that. I love Asian extra fine nibs. Would love to give some European extra fines a try though. What are the ones you would recommend below $200? Absolutely. So the Faber-Castell loom that I just talked about a second ago would be a great one. Granted, it's way under $200. It's, $40. But the extra fine nib on this one is really good. I'm a big fan of those. And I think that it approaches a Asian extra fine. So try that one out. Lamy 2000 in extra fine I think is worth a shot. It's not quite as fine, but the Lamy 2000 extra fine is kind of a daily user for me. I actually keep it at home and I journal with it in my Leuchtturm A5 dot grid. So I'm using a 5mm ruling to write with that, and it manages pretty well. I use Noodler's Black on it as my preference, but I think that one is worth checking out in the 156 range. Price-wise, another good option would be an Edison pen, and I sometimes love to just pull out pens that you can't get anymore just to kind of rub it in your face, but this is the Edison Nouveau Premier in the Water Lily, affectionately known as unicorn barf throughout the industry and throughout the community, but it's a fun color, but not available anymore, but still the same concept of the pen. It's a number 6 size nib, which is available in a lot of different Edison pens. Use German Jowo nibs. Nice writing, extra fine, so I think you can check that one out. Not quite as fine as most Japanese fines, but still solid writing pens. For that matter, Goulet nibs as well. Still made by Jowo, same manufacturer as the Edison nibs, so that would work as well. We only sell the nibs separately, not in a pen, but you could stick it into any pen that has a number 6, such as a Jinhao or something like that. And then TWSBI as well uses Jowo nibs. So the TWSBI 580, the back, the Mini, all those are using Jowo nibs. So you can check out any of those. There's extra fines on most, if not all of those models. So you can check those out too. Cool. All right, thoughts along life's highway on Instagram. If you've never used a fountain pen and love a very fine line but not a scratchy pen, what do you suggest? Okay, so this is an interesting question, because if you've never used a fountain pen, extra fine nibs can sometimes be a little bit touchy to get into, but since you are asking me this and watching this response probably, I'm going to assume that you know a little bit more than the average person when it comes to fountain pens. So if you don't know anything about fountain pens, I typically wouldn't recommend an extra fine as your first, unless it's an extra fine that tends to be a little bit wetter. Reason being, extra fine nibs tend to be a little bit toothier and tend to be a little finicky in terms of the rotation in your hand, and that's just, in the pen angle and stuff too, and that's just stuff that most people aren't used to thinking about if they haven't used fountain pens before, so it can sometimes have not as great of an experience. Now, granted, if you are a pen enthusiast and you are introducing a friend of yours over into it, you can probably coach them through it and teach them kind of how to hold it and stuff like that. But if it's just any old person coming off the street, this is the only slice that they'll ever see about fountain pens before they buy their first one. I'm going to say probably go with a fine instead of an extra fine, just because it's going to be a little more forgiving. It's going to feel a little bit better on the page, because when you get to extra fines, some of them can start to feel a little bit toothy, even if they're writing properly. Just, it's physics. The smaller the tip is on that nib, the more feedback you're going to feel as you're rubbing across the paper. So I would maybe stick towards fines if that's truly the situation you're in, but since you're watching this, I'm going to say you could probably go with more of a true extra fine. So just kind of be aware of that. I would say, as you're writing with your pen, be cognizant of your pen angle. The tendency when you're using a roller ball or a ballpoint pen, I have, the Pilot G2, very popular roller ball, and then of course the Bic Crystal, which is just a classic ballpoint pen, which I have here for demonstration purposes only. Don't get too mad at me, okay? So with these kinds of things, you're usually having to hold them at a pretty steep angle, and you're having to bear down on them, and every time you go to write, you got to do the swirling action to get it started, and then you got to write, and you're usually pressing down pretty good as you go, right? That's a pretty typical experience. You probably don't even think about it as you're doing it. You're so used to using these. But immediately, if you go to roller balls too, that's going to be better. You're not going to have to bear down quite as much. So if you've been using roller balls pretty religiously, it's a little less of a transition. But once you get into fountain pens, you really don't need to provide pressure, or you shouldn't if it's working properly and it's cleaned out and all that kind of stuff. A properly operating fountain pen really should be able to work just from the weight of its own body. That's how it should work. So as you're writing, you're really just holding the pen and guiding it. You're not pressing into the paper. So one way to help keep you from doing that is, instead of having a steeper pen angle, lower it a little bit. So lower that pen angle, and that's going to help. And it's going to help it write a little bit smoother, and it's going to be a little more forgiving in terms of your rotation and stuff. And then also lighten up on the pressure. You don't want to have a lot of pressure. The more pressure you put down on it from habits of using, the pens of old, the more it's gonna give you that feeling of dragging and cutting into the paper and all that kind of stuff. So lighten up on the pressure. It's gonna help you a lot. And I don't think you need to go with anything too expensive when you start. I think if you want to go, on kind of a finer nib, I think a good one to start out with is the Platinum Carbon Desk Pen. I don't talk about this pen a whole lot, but it's got a pretty darn fine nib. And it's not maybe the smoothest nib out there, but it's a cheap pen. It's only $12, and you can write with it and get used to using a fountain pen, especially an extra fine like this. And the fact that the pen looks so different than a normal pen, it just kind of makes you think a little bit more about how you're writing with it. So that's one option there. I think another great option is a Pilot Metropolitan in a fine nib. Of course, I talk about this pen all the time because it's $15, great writing pen. But if you go with a fine nib on the Metropolitan, did I just say extra fine? I think I just said fine nib. Can't remember what I just said, but it doesn't come in an extra fine. You got to go with a fine. If you get a fine nib on this, it's a Japanese grind on a fine, so it's going to be pretty fine. But it's actually surprisingly smooth. So this is a great introduction to fountain pens. Lots of color options. There's a reason why I talk about this pen so much. And that's all I have to say about that. Let's talk about ink, shall we? Vixnish on Instagram says, I'm obsessed with sheening ink. Obsessed. I'm not talking about the shimmery stuff with the metallic dust added, but real sheening inks. So what makes certain inks sheen, and why don't Noodler's inks sheen even though they're highly saturated? Also, is there an extensive list of sheening inks out there somewhere? So talking about shimmering versus sheening. So shimmering is really like Jeroboam, Emerald of Chivor, and really all the 1670 inks. You're talking about the Diamine Shimmertastics. Diatramentis has some shimmering type of inks now that are getting out there. So there's lots of basically ink with, for lack of a better term, glitter added to it. It's not, the traditional glitter like you would think, but it's an added physical component to it. It's not just purely liquid that can kind of settle in the bottle, and it just adds a whole very sparkly element to your writing. It's pretty cool, but not necessarily what everybody wants. That's different from sheen. Sheen is typically, you see this with inks that are dark blue, dark green, maybe a red or a pink here and there, or a purple might have kind of a yellowish or greenish tinge to it. You'll come across that every now and then, but I think most associated with it is like a dark blue. I think a Diamine Majestic Blue that just has a really intense red sheen over it. It's one of my favorites, by the way. Noodler's inks, why don't they have it? There's a couple Noodler's inks that do. The one that does the most, I feel, is Noodler's Ottoman Azure, which is pretty much like the Diamine Majestic Blue of the Noodler's line. It's a deep, dark blue with a red sheen to it. So that one does legitimately have sheen. Noodler's Aircore Blue Black can a little bit. It's more of a shader than it is a sheener, but you can check that one out. Noodler's Blue Black 2 kind of walks that line as well. And there's a couple others that are kind of close, but I couldn't recall them off the top of my head. I feel like there was like some magentas that got there, but I haven't really paid that much attention to Noodler's sheening inks. There's a lot of other brands that have sheening inks. In fact, I did a video called Top 10 Sheening Inks a while back. I gave kind of a shout out to the shimmering inks there, but that was actually a little bit before, kind of as the Diamine Shimmertastic was coming out. So I kind of gave mostly other sheening options. That was before shimmering really became a kind of a separate thing, before sheening. So that video's got a little bit of datedness to it. But you can check that out and get a little bit better idea. As far as some additional things, I got a couple of troubleshooting questions. This is from Anthony T on Facebook. Okay, Brian, riddle me this. Over time, the nibs on my Lamy Safari are not fitting as snug as they originally did. Some of my most used nibs will shift laterally while I write, causing the center slit to be out of alignment. Is there a procedure for adjusting them again to fit right. Okay, let me pull out where is my Lamy? Here's my All-Star, which is the same feed and nib arrangement as the Safari. So what Anthony's talking about here is the nib can shift a little bit side to side, which I'm kind of forcing it to happen now, and it's not drastic on here, but he's talking about the nib that's kind of wonk, 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 doing that kind of thing. There's a couple of causes that can happen from that. One could be, actually the nib could be affected in some way. That's pretty rare because, the nibs are made to be removed, which is where some of this can happen. But the nib is pretty tough, so unless you like dropped it somehow or crunched it somehow, it's probably not the nib. It's probably your feed. The way that these nibs fit on is they have these tiny wings right here that fit on the side of the feed. And the nib just slides right on there and is held. And it can bounce back and forth a little bit. And if you've been using it, especially swapping the nibs back and forth all the time, it can happen. But usually what ends up causing this is when you're writing with some heavy pressure over a long period of time. But if you're writing with heavy pressure, what's happening is it's putting pressure on the nib, the tip of the nib itself, which is causing the nib, which is only held on by these wings right here. Should I zoom in? Probably. Let me zoom in a little bit. So if you're looking at the pen close up, yeah, boy, that's way better, isn't it? Oh, how about that? Good job, Brian. So if you're looking at it, you don't need to see my stubble. Where are we at here? Okay, so if you're looking at the nib, you can see these wings that I'm talking about here, right here. So these wings on the side, if you look at it kind of head on, that's what the wings are looking like. So if you put the nib on these wings, so it's kind of halfway seated on there right now, it's these little tiny pieces of plastic that are really the only thing that are holding that nib on. So when you're writing and you're providing a lot of pressure, you're causing it to lift up and put pressure on those wings. So the nib is coming up and it's pulling on these wings right here. So I think what happens over time is as you're writing with it, if you write with a decent amount of pressure, it can cause it to bend up a little bit, and it can actually cause that plastic on the feed to malform just a little bit. Just enough so that it's not grabbing quite so tight on the front of it, which is why it's rocking back and forth like that. So if I hold it up like this, I can rock it to the side just like that and rock it. And this is a brand new one. So some movement like this is not super unusual, but you're going to notice more of this movement when you're writing with heavy pressure, and over time it's going to cause it to wear even more, which could exacerbate the issue. So a lot of your solution is to actually just lighten up on your writing pressure, which I know is going to seem like a lot because you're like, I want to write how I want to write, and that's fine, but just realize that's probably what's causing this issue on your pen. And then if it's really bad to the point where like the nib is slipping off and it's really not functional anymore, you can contact Lamy USA, or if you're not in the USA, whoever your Lamy distributor is, and you can look at a warranty replacement. Unfortunately, Lamy does not supply their retailers with replacement feeds, so even if you send it back to me, I wouldn't be able to help you with that because I don't have replacement feeds. So it's not anything that I can like warranty service repair your pen for, unfortunately. I wouldn't mind doing that because it's not hard, I just don't have a supply of feeds. So that's something you could consider doing as well. If you really got desperate and it came down to it, as far as wanting to repair it yourself, you can kind of bend the wings on the nib itself to get it to grab on a little tighter. That's kind of a last resort though, because then you're kind of changing what the nib is, and you can bend it back a little bit, but it's easy to kind of mangle the nib if you don't know what you're doing. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. I'm going to grab a quick sip of water before I move on to the next question. I got, let's see here, 3 more questions. We can do this. All right, this is from Sai Sheng on Instagram. For pens with a threaded cap, like the Pelikan M400, can easily get scratch marks on the pen barrel, where the cap and the barrel are in contact. Do you have any suggestions to prevent or minimize the scratching? And as I'm doing this, I realize I did not actually grab a Pelikan, so I will go do that now. If you will hang tight with me for 1 second. You drive on the parkway and park on the driveway. Think about that for a second while I grab a pen. Okay. Here we go. Let's see here. I really want to find here. This isn't an M400, but it's an M800. It looks fairly similar. But the situation that you're dealing with, and what you're discussing here. I have my monitor over here. That's why I keep looking over this way. I can see easily my framing. So you're talking about when you're using the pen, when you go to post it, you post it on, and it's got threads on the inside of the cap here. Now that actually is not affecting your issue. It's really just the end of it. So your threads could cause some scratching kind of up here. And actually now as I'm inspecting my pen, I've had this pen for 6 years now. And I've never polished it. So I'm going to inspect my own pen as we're talking here. I've got some fine scratches here. Yeah. Some of it is just wear and tear from kind of moving the pen around. Some of it could very well be from the cap itself. But it's not extremely unusual to happen like that, where you post the pen and then you, oh, I'm very zoomed in, where you post the pen and then it can cause some fine scratches on it. It's worse with some types of pens than others because, again, a metal pen you're not going to deal with it unless you're like truly scratching the finish, like deep scratching and getting the paint off there, or whatever, you know, anodization or whatever it is. But that's pretty tough. With plastic like this, it's a little easier to see some of these fine scratches. It really depends on how much it bothers you. Personally, I don't really let it bother me very much because if I'm using it, I just kind of view it as, you know, I've earned those. But over time, you know, I can understand where you may want to do that. It's not hard to get that out of there. One thing that I can recommend that you can do, it's pretty easy to do. I don't sell these. I probably should at this point. I just haven't found a good source for them. But just polishing cloth, just a jeweler's cloth. You can get this at any place that sells jewelry or most department stores. It's a cloth that has like a polishing compound kind of built into it, and it works on metal as well as plastic. So it's pretty easy. You just kind of go on it like this, and it can give a nice shine to it. It's not easy to really cause any damage with it. You know, and there's like a rougher side, which is the gray side, and then there's the purple side is a finer side for like really fine polishing. So this can kind of get the scratches out, and I've never done this before on this pen, so we'll give it a shot. This particular one is a sterling silver cloth, so you can get gold or silver cloths. I'm not sure that it makes a difference when you're polishing plastic, but I can see that it's shining it up, especially on that black. Actually, I can really see that it's shining it up. It's not going to show up very well on the camera, so I'm not going to zoom in. But as I'm polishing it up, even just spending 20 seconds on it like that, it definitely makes a big difference. It actually shines up the gold on there too, which is kind of nice. So I can see a difference there. So honestly, that is really kind of all you need. You know, and it's like you can save yourself a lot of stressing about it. You do that like, you know, however often you feel you need to, but once every, I don't know, 3 months, 6 months, something like that, if you use a pen really regularly. If you don't use it as regularly, do it once every 5 years, you know, just like that. And in a matter of a minute, you can polish up your pen to basically look new. You can also get a plastic acrylic polish if you need to get really aggressive, like if you've got, you know, a deeper scratch that's in there. I used this stuff back from my pen making days. This is not very fancy stuff, not super practical for you. It's an example of what it is. It's just, you know, ultra gloss plastic polish. It's just a liquid, you know, polishing compound. Not all that dissimilar from the type of polishing compound you might use for your car. This is just more of a liquid form of that. So you can use an automotive polishing compound if you so desire. But you just want to be careful when you start to get into compounds and stuff that if you don't really know what you're getting into. Generally, automotive, like fine polishing compounds can be okay, but you know, if it's an expensive pen, you may want to test it on a less expensive pen to start, just to make sure it's not going to be like a grittier kind of polishing material that could cause deeper scratches than what you already had on the pen. You don't really want that. But most polishing compounds are not that aggressive, so you should probably be okay. I would stay away from things like micro mesh and stuff like that you can use micro mesh, you know, which is this gray stuff. Where's my micro mesh? This gray stuff that you use for like nib smoothing. It feels very leathery and very smooth. You can use that to polish up acrylic for sure, but I would stay away from this, especially because it can get a little too aggressive on the metal components. And when you're dealing with, you know, gold-plated metal and stuff like that, you can actually wear away the plating. So that's where I would be careful. Going with something like a jeweler's cloth is going to be much less aggressive and much safer on your pen to use for a long period of time. I think you'll be in pretty good shape with that. All right, I got a couple of personal questions to finish us out here. So this first one is from Aaron S. on Facebook. Happy holidays, Goulet team. Inspired by your classy Christmas sweater collection, I'd love to hear what Christmas morning traditions the Goulets have. At our house, you can always count on mimosas, a lit fireplace, soft Christmas music playing in the background, and the smell of cinnamon rolls in the oven. Thank you for all you do. Excuse me. Yeah, so growing up, my family had really more of a Christmas Eve tradition because my family moved down, my immediate family moved down from Connecticut. My extended family is all from Connecticut. So my parents are both from really big families. We're kind of the ones that moved away. So every single holiday for us was trucking on up from Virginia to Connecticut. So I have many childhood memories of 8 to 10 hour car rides, depending on traffic, on around these holidays like Christmas time with my family to go up and visit all of our extended family. So it just kind of worked out easier for us Christmas time wise to do more of a Christmas Eve kind of celebration at our home and then wake up early and drive Christmas morning because there's like no traffic on 95. Just drive up Christmas morning and then we would get there in the shortest amount of time as opposed to trying to drive earlier and being caught in tons of traffic and being frustrated and all that kind of stuff. And then like, what do my parents do with the presents? Do we truck up a carload of presents, you know? Not that I had a carload of presents as a kid, but you know what I mean? You know, like one Christmas we got a bean bag, which is huge. You know, it's like we couldn't truck that up to Connecticut and then bring it back. You know, so things like that, it just kind of ended up working out for my family of doing more of a immediate family celebration at our house on Christmas Eve and then driving up Christmas morning to my extended families. Rachel's situation was a little different. Her family has much more of a Christmas morning ritual kind of thing. You know, they had a 2-story house where they would come down and see the Christmas tree. So it was always like Rachel and her sister would kind of wait at the top of the stairs while her parents would, get the camera ready and all that kind of stuff, and they would kind of walk down the stairs and have that reaction of seeing the Christmas tree with all the presents that Santa brought and all that kind of stuff. So literally to the point where they were still doing that, like even when Rachel and I were like engaged and then getting married, it was like, once Rachel and I were getting married, she was like, do I really have to walk down the stairs Christmas morning still? But, it was kind of tradition. But anyway, we don't do that anymore. But now we do it with our kids. So that kind of became a thing. So that's a little more of a ritual thing. And they always do like the Pillsbury, cinnamon rolls. That's definitely a tradition we have. And then we have one important thing to do that we've done. So anyway, I give that backstory so that I can explain what we do now. So you see this is all just kind of like whatever, it's all just family stuff that, we do. But what we've kind of carried on with that is, my parents live locally here. Rachel's parents live further away. So, her parents don't get to see our kids quite as regularly. So my parents are kind of like, hey, look, major holidays, that's fine. You guys can go with them and just basically give them all the major holidays. So, Thanksgiving and Christmas, they always kind of get first dibs. So, we usually end up doing, kind of because of my parents' tradition of kind of doing more stuff on Christmas Eve, we'll do more of a Christmas Eve tradition. And then once we've kind of done that, we'll drive, because it's like hour 45 minutes to Rachel's parents. Then we'll drive and do Christmas morning with her family up there. So it kind of works being able to kind of timeshare like that. But then we'll usually spend a few days up there at Christmas time with her family. And that's just kind of what's ended up working for us. Our kids enjoy it, and it's like we're not like huge on tradition, but that's just kind of what's ended up working out. So we've kind of more absorbed some of our parents' traditions and carried them on, but it's not super strict or anything like that. And then last question for this week is from Planny McPlannerson on Instagram. I love that handle. If you could only use one pen for a year, which one would you choose and why? And I typically hate questions like this because I have a real pen problem where I like to use a lot of different pens. I'm not joking. I carry in my backpack, easily I carry 20 pens around with me at all times. I do. Especially now that I'm doing like more of my own photography at home. I got a nice DSLR. I've got a little photo tent at home. If you watch my Instagram, I have been doing my own stuff, just messing around. I need it as a creative outlet, and I love pens, so I'll bring a bunch of my pens home and photograph a bunch and then bring them back and bring different ones home and all that. So I'm kind of cycling pens back and forth all the time. So I like to know a lot about my different pens, so I really don't have just one favorite pen. So I kind of hate being put in a box and making a decision about one favorite pen. But I was like, okay, let me just do it. It's only for a year. So worst case, you know, I always get asked questions like, is it a desert island and you can only use one pen and ink for the rest of your life? What would it be? And I'm like, I don't know. That would be hard. But okay, so for some of the ones, okay, if it's for the next year, what could I do? I definitely have some ones that are like top contenders for me right now. It kind of came down to two different ones. And I feel like I need to say a caveat of my Custom 74. I love it. I will always, you know, cherish it. It's not necessarily, if it was like the one pen that I had to use for a full year, I don't know that I would necessarily love that, because there's some things about that pen that I'm not as crazy about. You know, I love the pen for a lot of different reasons, but I don't love every aspect of that pen, if that makes sense. I would want to choose a pen that I'm really pretty overall happy with all the aspects of the pen. Does that make sense? So, specifically the Custom 74, having to clean out that converter. If it was one pen for a whole year, I would be changing ink colors constantly because I love doing that. But that would be really annoying to have to do on a pen that's not as easy to clean. So pens that are easy to clean, that I have just by process of elimination that I've been using naturally on a very regular basis, for me it would boil down to either the Lamy 2000 or the Visconti Homo sapiens. Now, it's kind of hard to compare the two in some ways. You know, there's quite a big price disparity between the two. Homo sapiens is obviously more expensive. I end up carrying around my Homo sapiens on a regular basis. I love the feel of the volcano. I love the cap on this pen. Just the quick release cap is great. The hook safe, lock that they call it. The nib right's great. There's a fine nib on this one. I find that to be very versatile. It's very wet, but very versatile. And the vacuum filler is very cool. The big knock against this is it does not have an ink window. And the ink capacity is pretty decent. It's not unbelievable. It's like 1.5 mil. So it's pretty decent. A very solid pen. I carry it around with me in my pocket, and it feels great. Lamy 2000, things I like about it. Very durable, classic design, really cool design. I appreciate the design aspects of this. Simple, but yet really strong. I like the metal. We kind of matched with it. It's a cool design. Piston fill, so pretty decent. Ink capacity. Ink window, really nice. That's a big feature for me. And I like the hooded nib too, because I find that lasts, it keeps the ink really, wet on the nib. So I really like that too. I'm not as crazy about the clip on this pen. I find that especially if I'm wearing like a fleece pullover type of situation, I can't like clip it onto thicker material like that as easily, even jeans and stuff. So I end up kind of having to carry this around in my pocket, not actually clipping it to anything quite as much. The Homo sapiens, though, it's like a big thing, and I can clip it on whatever, and it's easy to grab onto like that. That's a big win for me. So it's really tough between the two. And honestly, as I was thinking through it last night, as I was prepping these notes, man, I'm kind of like going back on even what I had really decided. Darn you for making me choose. I think if I really came down to just one pen between these two, I would probably go with the Lamy 2000 with an extra fine nib, because the extra fine nib is really versatile on a bunch of different papers. And I think the one thing that would really edge this out the most is the fact that it's easy to clean. It's a piston filler, but you can actually separate it at the neck here. And then if you are delicate, you can remove the nib itself. It cleans really easily. You got to be kind of gentle when you put it back in there, but I've done it a bunch of times. And then you got to make sure not to lose this little ring here, because that's what keeps the cap on when it's all closed up. But you can clean it out pretty easily. And if I was having one pen for the rest of the year and I was changing colors a lot, I would use an extra fine nib to be versatile as possible. Lamy 2000. I think that's where I would settle. It's exhausting having to think about that, but that's just kind of where I would settle. So I'll probably change my mind like next week, but I literally almost backed out just now and said the Homo sapiens, because as I'm holding it, I'm like, I love this pen. Anyway, I'm glad I don't have to choose though. So I'm not going to make that the question of the week, because I've talked a lot about like which pen would be the one pen whatever that you would whatever. I just did that one pretty recently. But the question of the week for this week, I would, since this is right before the holidays here, whether you celebrate Christmas, Hanukkah, any other Kwanzaa, any other holiday that you might celebrate, I just want to know, it's a very holiday kind of filled time of year. I would love to hear like what are some of the cherished holiday traditions that you have in your family. You can just kind of share that in the comments. I think that'll be really kind of cool, especially because we're not going to be doing a Q&A Q&A next week. So if we had some really robust comments, it could just be kind of nice to go back and revisit those. That would be kind of neat. So go ahead and leave that question of the week here. If you like what I talked about and any of the products here, you can always check them out on gouletpens.com. Be sure to leave me questions for 2 weeks from now when I come back. That way you can hit it strong again. And I just hope you have a really wonderful holidays. Won't see you for a little bit, but we'll be back and come strong. And I just hope you really enjoy it. Thanks so much for supporting me and my company at this time. We're working our tails off to try to get everything out to you as quickly as possible so you can get what you need to give your gifts to others or for yourself. And subscribe if you haven't already, for sure, which if you've watched through a whole Q&A at this point, I would think that you would like to subscribe, but go figure, who knows. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend and a great next couple of weeks. And right on.